You don't own access. You just haven't met the guy who controls it yet. The first thing I heard was the sharp electronic beep, red, angry, repeating over and over like a heartbeat gone wrong. Then came the engines. Dozens of them. Idling. Impatient. Expensive. I didn't even have to look to know what was happening, but I did anyway. From across the water, standing on the maintenance dock with the early morning humidity clinging to my skin, I watched a line of luxury SUVs stack up at the only gate leading to the lake houses. Black Escalations. White Range Rovers. One after another, inching forward, stopping, trying again. Beep. Denied. Beep. Denied. The sound echoed across the water, mixing with the low hum of the lake pumps cycling through their morning routine. And right there, at the front of it all, was Linda Whitmore. Perfect posture, perfect hair, and a face that had never once heard the word no until today. She slammed her key fob against the scanner again, harder this time, like force alone might fix the problem. It didn't. The gate didn't move. It just blinked red back at her like it was enjoying the show. I leaned against the railing and let the moment breathe. Let it settle. Because this wasn't an accident. This wasn't a glitch. This was scheduled. 24 hours earlier, Linda had looked at me dead in the eye across a polished conference table and told me my $28,500 repair bill was excessive. Said it with that tight smile, like she was doing me a favor just by saying the word out loud. The smell of her expensive perfume still stuck in my head. Sharp, artificial, covering something colder underneath. I'd rebuilt their entire access system. Every gate, every dock lock, every electronic checkpoint that separated those lake houses from the outside world. Weeks of work, 12-hour days, crawling through conduit lines, calibrating sensors, rewiring panels most people didn't even know existed. And she reduced it to a line item she could ignore. We'll review it, she said. Translation, we're not paying. I remember nodding. Calm. Quiet. The way I always am when I already know how this ends. Because here's the thing about systems like this, people think. They own them because they paid for them. They don't. They just use them. I build them. I control how they behave when things go wrong. And yesterday, after that meeting, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I went home, opened my laptop, and logged into the backend they didn't even know existed. Admin access. Full control. The kind you don't hand over unless you understand exactly what you're giving away. I set a timed override. Simple command. Clean. Legal. By the book. Effective at exactly 7 a.m., the same time those lake houses come alive every Saturday morning. Boats prepped. Coolers packed. Weekend routines built on the assumption that everything just works. Behind me, the lake water lapped gently against the dock, steady and indifferent. In front of me, the beeping didn't stop. Linda stepped back from the gate now, phone already in her hand, voice rising just enough to carry across the quiet morning air. Confusion first, then frustration. It always follows that order. I check my watch. 7:12 a.m., 12 minutes into the most expensive inconvenience they'd ever experienced. And the best part? Nothing was broken. Everything was working exactly the way I designed it to. I have always liked mornings on that lake. Before the engines, before the noise, before people start treating water like it belongs to them. There is a stillness to it. A kind of honesty. The air smells clean, just a hint of algae and wet wood, and the only sound is the soft hum of the circulation pumps doing their job in the background. Systems working quietly, exactly the way they were designed. That is the part most people never notice. They see the houses, the docks, the boats tied up like trophies. They do not see the infrastructure underneath, the wiring, the control panels, the fail-safes that keep everything running. That is my world. My name is Ethan Cole, and for the last 12 years I have made a living building and maintaining systems that people depend on without ever thinking about them. Gates, access controls, marina locks, utility routing. If it clicks, beeps, or decides whether you get in or stay out, there is a good chance someone like me put it there. This lake project was supposed to be one of the clean ones. Good budget, clear scope, a single access road leading to a gated entry, one reinforced dock system with integrated locking cleats, and a central control unit tying everything together. I remember the first day I drove out here, gravel crunching under my tires, sun hitting the water just right. It reminded me of the kind of place my dad used to point out when I was a kid. He worked maintaining his whole life. Not glamorous work, but honest. He used to say, "Son, The people who build the systems are the ones who decide how long they last. Back then I did not understand what he meant. I thought he was just talking about doing a good job. Now I know he meant something else entirely. I built this system from the ground up. Every cable run measured twice. Every sensor calibrated to the inch. I installed the gate controller myself, mounted it inside a weather-sealed panel that only I had full administrative access to. The HOA had their interface, sure. A polished dashboard on a tablet that let them add residents, assign key fobs, open the gate remotely when they felt important. But that was surface level. User access. What they did not have was root control, the kind that lets you decide what happens when something stops working, or when it works exactly as instructed. Linda Whitmore came into the picture halfway through the project. She did not build anything, but she acted like she owned every inch of it, always showing up in pressed outfits that did not belong anywhere near a construction site, heels clicking against unfinished concrete like she was inspecting a hotel instead of a job in progress. She would stand there with her clipboard, nodding slowly, asking questions that sounded informed until you listened closely. Can we make the gate faster? Do we really need all these backup systems? I answered every question the same way. Calm. Professional. Because I had dealt with her type before. People who think control comes from titles and committees, not from understanding how things actually work. By the time we finished, everything was running clean. Access logs accurate. Backup power tested. Emergency overrides. Documented. I handed over their system with a full report, every detail spelled out in plain English. And for a while, it worked exactly the way it was supposed to. Until yesterday. Until a number on an invoice suddenly mattered more to them than the system they depended on. That is when the balance shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. And once that shift happens, there is no going back to the way things were. The problem with people like Linda is not that they do not understand systems. It is that they believe systems will always bend to them. I saw it the moment she called that meeting. Late afternoon, sun still hanging low over the water, reflecting off the glass windows of those lake houses like everything was perfect. Inside the clubhouse, the air smelled like fresh coffee and polished wood, the kind of place designed to make decisions feel official even when they are not. I walked in with my invoice folder under my arm, same way I have done 100 times before, expecting a conversation, maybe a negotiation. That is how it usually goes. You build something, you explain the work, they push back a little, you meet somewhere in the middle. That's business. But this was different. Linda was already seated at the head of the table when I stepped in, fingers laced together, expression calm in that practiced way that means she has already made up her mind. A few board members sit along the sides, quiet, watching, the way people do when they are waiting to see which direction the power is going to lean. She didn't even look at the invoice at first, just glanced at me, then backed down at her notes like I was interrupting something more important. Ethan, she said, slowly and measured, we have reviewed your bill. The way she said reviewed made it sound like a favor. I set the folder down in front of her anyway, opened it to the breakdown. Every hour logged. Every part listed. Every system test documented. Clean. Transparent. Professional. She flipped through a few pages without really reading them. I could tell by the way her eyes moved too fast, skipping lines, not stopping long enough to process anything. Then she closed it. Just like that. This number is excessive, she said, sliding the folder back toward me across the table like it was something she did not want to touch. Excessive. $28,500 for a system that controlled access to multi-million-dollar properties. For a network that worked flawlessly because I built it too. I kept my voice even. Asked if there was a specific line item she wanted to discuss. That is when the shift happened. She leaned back slightly, crossed her arms, and gave me a smile that did not reach her eyes. We are not going to approve this payment, she said. No delay. Not revised. Not negotiated. Reject. Just like that. One of the board members cleared his throat like he might say something, then stopped. Nobody wanted to be the first to disagree with her. I felt the room settle into that quiet tension, the kind that sits heavy in your chest. I could hear the faint hum of the building's air system above us, steady and constant, reminding me of something important. Systems do not care about opinions. They respond to inputs. We appreciate your work, she added, as if that balanced anything. But this is not the number we agreed on. That part was not true. The contract was clear, scope adjustments. Additional labor. Emergency repairs after the storm last month. All documented. All approved in writing. I knew it. She knew it. But she was counting on something else. Pressure. Intimidation. The idea that I would rather walk away than fight. I closed the folder slowly, feeling the weight of it in my hands. Not heavy enough for what it represented, but enough. Understood, I said. No argument. No raised voice. Just a single word. Her smile tightened slightly, like she expected more. Maybe she wanted a reaction. Something she could shut down. I didn't give her that. Because right then, sitting in that room, listening to the quiet approval of people who did not want to get involved, I realized something simple. They thought this was a negotiation. They thought this ended here. It didn't. It had just started. I stepped out of that clubhouse into the late afternoon heat, the kind that sticks to your shirt and slows everything down just enough to make you think. Gravel crunched under my boots as I walked back to my truck. The same path I had taken every day for the past 3 weeks while building a system they now claimed was optional. The lake was calm, almost too calm, like it had not heard what just happened inside. I opened the driver's side door, tossed the invoice folder onto the passenger seat, and just stood there for a second with my hand on the frame, listening. Distant water lapping against the dock. A faint metallic click from the gate cycling open for someone leaving. Everything working. Everything normal. That is what made it interesting. Because normal only exists until someone changes the inputs. I got in, started the engine, and let it idle while I pulled my phone out. No messages. No calls. No attempt to fix what they had just broken. That told me everything I needed to know. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a decision. And decisions have consequences, whether people plan for them or not. I drove out slowly, passing through the same gate I had installed, watching it open with that smooth hydraulic motion I had calibrated myself. The sensor read my credential, verified it, granted access. Simple, clean, predictable. I tapped the steering wheel lightly as it closed behind me, listening to the lock engage with that soft, final click. That sound stayed with me all the way home. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was dropping lower, casting long shadows across the concrete. My place is not much to look at. Single story, practical, everything in its place. Inside, it smells like solder and machine oil most days, a mix most people would not recognize but I have gotten used to. I set the folder down on my workbench, opened it again, and flipped through the pages one more time. Not because I needed to check the numbers. I already knew they were right. I was looking at the signatures, dates, approvals, the details that turn work into something enforceable. Everything was there. Every adjustment Linda had verbally agreed to during the project was backed by an email, a timestamp, a digital confirmation. She didn't think that mattered. Or maybe she thought I wouldn't use it. That was her first mistake. I walked over to my desk, powered up the laptop, and waited for the screen to come to life. The familiar interface loaded in seconds. Clean dashboard. System status all green. Gate operational. Dock locks secure. Access logs active. A system doing exactly what it was built to do. I logged in with my credentials, the ones that sit above everything else. Administrative control. The level that does not just operate the system, but defines it. There was a moment, right there, cursor blinking on the screen, where most people would hesitate. Think about relationships. Reputation. Future work. I thought about something simpler. Value. You do the work. You get paid. That is the baseline. Without that, nothing else holds. I navigated to the control settings, pulled up the access parameters, and reviewed them one more time. Time schedules. Override permissions. Emergency protocols. All written in clean lines of code and logic. No emotion. No opinions. Just conditions and outcomes. I created a new rule. Timed activation. 7:00 am next morning. Primary gate. Restricted access. Dock systems. Limited functionality. User-level credentials. Temporarily suspended. Admin override. Locked behind authentication they did not have. I read through it once. Twice. Not looking for mistakes. Just confirming the outcome. Then I hit save. The system accepted the change instantly. No hesitation, no resistance. Because to the system, this was not revenge. It was instructed. I closed the laptop, the click of it snapping shut louder than usual in the quiet room. Outside, the sky had shifted to that deep orange that only lasts a few minutes before fading out completely. I stood there, hands resting on the edge of the workbench, and let that same thought settle in again. They thought this was about a number. They were wrong. This was about control. And tomorrow morning, they were going to learn exactly how much of it they actually had. I woke up before the alarm, the way you do when your mind has already moved ahead of the day. The room was still dark, faint blue lights slipping through the blinds, and for a second everything felt quiet enough to forget what was about to happen. Then I heard it. Not outside. Not from the lake. Just the low hum of my laptop on the desk across the room, still running from the night before. Systems do not sleep. They just wait. I sat up, ran a hand across my face, and checked the time on my phone. 6:38 and 22 minutes before the switch flipped. I didn't rush. There was no reason to. I walked into the kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and stood there for a moment watching the steam curl upward, slow and steady. The smell was strong, familiar, grounding. I have always believed that if you do something intentional, you should be calm when it happens. No second guessing. No scrambling. Just execution. By 6:55 I was at my desk, laptop open, system dashboard glowing softly in the dim light. Everything still green. Gate operational. Dock locks secure. Access logs scrolling quietly as early risers came and went. I could see the pattern already. A few vehicles leaving the community for work. A couple of boats prepping for early runs. Routine. Predictable. Exactly what the system was designed to support. I took a sip of coffee and set the mug down just as the clock rolled over to 6:59. There is a specific kind of silence right before something changes. Not the absence of sound, but the pause before it shifts. I watched the timer count down on the screen. 3 seconds. 2. 1. The interface blinked once, subtle, almost unnoticeable if you were not looking for it. Then the status changed. Primary gate, restricted. User credentials, suspended. Dock access, limited. No alarms. No dramatic warnings. Just a quiet update that rewrote how the entire place functioned. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly. That was it. No noise on my end. No chaos. Just a system doing exactly what I told it to do. I opened the live access feed, pulling up the camera view from the main gate. The image sharpened into focus, and there it was. First car of the morning pulling up to the scanner. A silver SUV. It paused, window down. Driver holding out a key fob with the casual confidence of someone who expects things to work. The reader flashed. Red. The driver leaned forward, tried. Again. Red. A small pause. Confusion setting in. I could almost feel it through the screen. Then another vehicle pulled up behind them. And another. The line started forming faster than I expected. Weekend traffic. Of course. People heading out to the lake houses early, planning their day, assuming access was guaranteed. I watched as the second driver stepped out of their car, walked up to the gate, and pressed the call button. Nothing. Because that routed through the same system. Controlled. Defined. Limited. The first real sign of tension showed up in body language. Hands on hips. Heads turning. Someone checking their phone like it might explain what was happening. It wouldn't. Not yet. I took another sip of coffee, now slightly cooler, and shifted to the dock system feed. Same story. Lock indicators flipped. Unauthorized access attempts logged one after another. Boats sitting idle because the cleat locks would not release. All of it clean. All of it traceable. All of it legal under the terms they signed without reading closely enough. By 7:12, the gate feed changed again. A familiar figure stepped into view, moving with purpose. Linda Whitmore. Phone already in her hand. Posture tight. Energy different from the day before. Less controlled. More responsive. She pressed her key fob against the scanner. Once, twice, harder the third time like she could force it to recognize her authority. The reader answered the same way it answered everyone else. Red. She stepped back, looked around, then lifted the phone to her ear. I didn't need to hear what she was saying. I already knew. Because this is the moment people realize something simple. Systems do not care who you think you are. They only care what you are allowed to do. And right now, they were allowed to do nothing. By 7:20, the line at the gate had doubled, engines idling in uneven rhythm, the low rumble carrying through the camera feed like distant thunder that never quite breaks. You could see it in the way people moved now. The casual confidence from earlier was gone, replaced impatiently, hands tapping on steering wheels, doors opening and closing harder than necessary. A man in a golf shirt stepped out of a black SUV and walked straight up to the keypad, pressing buttons like he expected the system to respond to urgency. It didn't. The screen stayed the same. Red. Always red. I watched Linda pace in a tight circle near the forehead, phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharper, now even without sound. She turned away from the line once, scanning the road like she might find an answer just outside the frame. Then she looked back at the gate like it had personally betrayed her. That part almost made me smile. I shifted over to the access logs, watching the entries stack up in real time. Attempt after attempt. Each one recorded. Time stamped. Denied. There is a clarity in data that people do not always appreciate until it starts working against them. Every action leaves a trail. Every failure tells a story. I opened the system message panel and saw the first internal alert triggered by their own interface. Primary access failure. Administrator review required. That message would be sitting on Linda's tablet right now, blinking politely, asking for a level of control she did not have. I imagined her tapping through the menus, trying to find a setting that would fix this. Something labeled override or emergency access. But those options were not there for her. They never were. Because when I built the system, I separated responsibility from control. They could manage users. I managed the system itself. And now that distinction matters. My phone buzzed on the desk beside me, vibrating once, then again. I didn't need to look to know who it was. The timing was too precise. I let it ring for a few seconds anyway, long enough to let the situation develop on its own. When I finally picked it up, the screen confirmed it. Linda Whitmore. I answered calmly, bringing the phone to my ear while my eyes stayed on the gate feed. Ethan, what is going on? No greetings. No pretense. Just pressure. Her voice carried that tight edge, like she was trying to keep control and losing it in small pieces. I took a breath, slow and even. System is operating within configured parameters, I said. Not a lie. Not even close. There was a pause on the line, just long enough for that answer to land. Nobody can get in, she snapped, her tone rising just a fraction. In the background I could hear muffled voices, car doors, the kind of noise that builds when people start asking questions nobody can answer. I leaned back in my chair, listening. That is correct, I said. Simple. Direct. Another pause. This shorter time, sharper. You need to fix this. Immediately. There it was. The expectation. The assumption that this was still something she could command. I let a second pass before responding. Not to create drama, but to make sure the moment was clear. I can review the system, I said, choosing each word carefully, once the outstanding balance for completed work is resolved. Silence. Real silence this time. No background noise. Just the weight of what I said settling in. Of course, she didn't believe she could push people further than they were willing to go. She said finally, her voice lower now, controlled again, but tighter than before. I glanced back at the access logs, another string of denied entries lighting up the screen. I am enforcing the terms of a contract, I replied. No anger. No hesitation. Just the truth. Because that is the part people forget. This is not about emotion. It never was. It is about agreements. And what happens when one side decides they do not matter anymore? The line stayed quiet for a second longer. Then I heard her exhale slowly, like she was recalculating everything in real time. Outside, on the camera feed, another car pulled up, another attempt, another red light. The system kept working. Exactly as designed. The shift happens faster than most people expect. 1 minute it is inconvenience, a delay in plans, a minor disruption they think will be resolved with a phone call. The next, it turns into something heavier. Something that starts costing them more than just time. By 7:30, the line at the gate had stopped growing because there was nowhere left for it to go. Vehicles stretched back along the road, engines idling, heat rising off the asphalt in soft waves you could almost see through the camera feed. Doors opened more frequently now. People stepping out, talking in small groups, checking their phones, looking toward Linda like she had answers she didn't have. That is the part that always changes the dynamic. When the person in charge runs out of explanations. I watched as one of the residents approached her, gesturing back toward the line, clearly asking what was going on. She responded quickly, controlled, but her hands gave her away. Small movements, tighter than before. She was managing perception now, not the situation. Behind her, another attempt at the gate. Another red light. Always the same. I shifted my view to the internal system panel again. The error notifications had increased, not because anything was broken, but because the system was doing exactly what it was told to do at a scale they were not used to seeing. Dozens of denied entries per minute. Each one logged, categorized, stored. A perfect record of a morning that was no longer normal. My phone buzzed again, this time not just one call, but several notifications stacking up at once. Unknown numbers. Local area codes. I let them sit. There is a difference between urgency and panic, and I had learned a long time ago not to respond to the second one. Instead, I opened the contract file on my laptop, scrolling through the clauses I already knew by memory. Payment terms. Service conditions. Access rights. There it was, exactly where it needed to be. Failure to remit payment within agreed terms permits suspension of non-essential services pending resolution. Clean. Direct. Enforceable. Not hidden. Not vague. Just ignored until it mattered. Back on the gate feed, the situation was starting to turn. One of the residents walked away from the group, pulled out his phone, and began pacing as he talked, his expression sharper, more focused. That is usually the moment when legal words start entering the conversation. Liability. Contract. Obligation. Words that carry weight when someone decides to actually look at the details instead of assuming control. Linda noticed it too. I could see it in the way she turned her attention toward him, stepping closer, trying to regain control of the narrative. But narratives do not hold when reality keeps repeating the same outcome. Red light. Denied. No. Access. I took another sip of coffee, now lukewarm, and set the mug aside. The calm I felt was not satisfaction. It was clear, everything was unfolding exactly within the boundaries that had been defined from the start. No shortcuts. No improvisation. Just cause and effect. At 7:45, my phone rang again. Same name. Linda Whitmore. I let it ring once before answering. This time, her voice was different. Still controlled, but stripped down. Less performance. More calculation. We need to resolve this, she said, not asking, not demanding. Stating. I glanced at the contract on my screen, then back to the gate feed where another vehicle had just been turned away. I agree, I said. Simple. Neutral. Send me the updated payment confirmation, and I will restore full access. There was a pause, shorter than before. She was moving faster now. Adjusting. Because this was no longer about winning. It was about stopping the loss. You will have it, she said finally, each word measured. I ended the call without another word and leaned back in my chair, eyes still on the screen. Outside, nothing had changed yet. The line was still there. The gate still locked. The system still holding. But something else had shifted. Not in the code. Not in the hardware. In the understanding of the people who thought they were in control. And that shift is the one that matters most. By 8:05, the tone at the gate had changed completely. The idle chatter was gone, replaced by something tighter, more focused. You could see it in the way people stopped pacing and started making calls, the way a few of them stepped aside from the group, turning their backs to the others as if distance might give them better answers. The line of vehicles had not moved, but the energy had. What started as inconvenience had turned into calculation. I kept the camera feed on one side of the screen and the system panel on the other, watching both layers of the same situation unfold at once. On the surface, frustration. Underneath, data. Requests denied. Access attempts logged. System holding steady without deviation. That consistency is what makes everything else possible. My inbox chimed softly, a single notification cutting through the low hum of the room. I didn't rush to open it. Timing matters, not just in action, but in response. I took a breath, reached for the mouse, and clicked. Payment confirmation. Wire transfer. Full amount. $28,500. Plus an additional line item I had not expected. Processing fee. They had rounded it up without discussion. That told me everything about how fast the pressure had built on their side. I opened the attachment, scanned the details. Account numbers matched. Timestamp current. Verified. Clean. No conditions attached. No attempt to renegotiate. Just resolution. I leaned back slightly, letting the weight of that settle in. Not satisfied. Not relief. Just completion of a process that should have been simple from the beginning. My phone buzzed again almost immediately, Linda's name lighting up the screen before the second vibration even finished. I answered without looking away from the gate feed. We feel it, she said, voice steady now, controlled again, but different from before. Less authority, more precision. I see that, I replied. Outside, nothing had changed yet. The line's still there. The gate still closed. People still waiting. "Restore access," she said, not demanding this time, just stating the next step in a sequence she now understood. I let a second pass, just enough to confirm the transfer had cleared through the system on my end. Everything aligned. Every requirement met. "Stand by," I said. I moved the cursor back to the control panel, pulled up the override settings I had written the night before. The same clean lines of logic that shut everything down were sitting there, waiting for a different instruction. I hovered over the toggle for a moment, not hesitating, just marking the transition. Then I executed the command. Access restored. User credentials reactivated. Dock systems returned to full function. The system responded instantly, status indicators flipping from restricted to operational in one smooth update. No drama. No delay. Just a shift from one state to another. I watched the gate feed closely. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the scanner flashed. Green. The first vehicle in line moved forward, slowly at first, then through, the gate opening with that same smooth motion it always had. One by one, the cars followed, engines revving slightly as the line finally began to clear. The sound of movement replaced the silence of waiting. On the screen, Linda stepped back from the gate, phone still in her hand, watching the flow resume. Her posture had changed. Not defeated, not angry, just different, adjusted, because now she understood something she had not before. Control is not about position. It is about leverage. And leverage only exists when you respect the system that gives it to you. I closed the system panel, the soft click of the laptop echoing in the quiet room again. Outside, the lake would go back to normal. Boats launching, weekends continuing, everything looking exactly the way it did before. But underneath that surface, something had shifted permanently. Not in the hardware, not in the code, in the way they would think the next time they decided what something was worth. Because now they knew. Access is not something you assume. It is something that can be taken away just as easily as it is given. The lake was quiet again by late morning, the kind of quiet that makes it seem like nothing ever happened. Boats cut across the water in smooth lines, sunlight reflecting off polished hulls like the morning had reset itself. From a distance, everything looked exactly the same. The gate opened and closed without hesitation. Dock locks released on command. Engines started, laughter carried across the water, and people slipped right back into the routines they had been pulled out of just a few hours earlier. That is the thing about systems. When they work, nobody thinks about them. When they stop, even for a moment, they become the only thing anyone can see. I shut down the live feed and let the room settle back into its usual stillness. The hum of the laptop faded as the screen dimmed, leaving just the faint ticking sound of the wall clock and the distant noise of a truck passing on the road outside. Normal again. Or at least it looked that way. My phone sat on the desk, silent now. No more calls. No more urgency. The problem had been solved, so the noise disappeared with it. That is how it always goes. I picked up the invoice folder again, flipping it closed this time instead of opening it. The weight felt different now, not because anything inside had changed, but because it had been acknowledged, recognized, paid, the way it should have been from the start. I set it aside and leaned back in my chair, staring at the blank screen for a moment longer than necessary. Not thinking about the money, not even about Linda, just about the sequence. Action, response, adjustment, resolution, clean, predictable. Exactly how a system is supposed to operate when every part finally aligns. Later that afternoon, I drove back out to the lake. Not because I needed to, just to see it in person. Gravel crunched under my tires again as I approached the gate, the same sound from the first day I arrived on site. The scanner reads up green before I even fully stopped, recognizing my credentials without delay. The gate opened smoothly, no hesitation, no resistance. I drove through at a steady pace, listening to the soft mechanical hum as it closed behind me. That sound was different now. Not louder, not sharper, just clear. Inside, everything was exactly where it should be. Boats tied neatly to the docks. Water calm. Houses standing quiet along the shoreline. If you did not know what had happened that morning, you would never guess anything had been off. I stepped out of the truck and walked down toward the main dock, the wood warm under my boots from the sun. The air carried that same mix of water and treated lumber, steady and familiar. A few residents glanced in my direction as I passed. Not confrontational, not friendly either. just aware. Because now they knew who I was. Not just the contractor who built their system. The one who controlled it. Linda was there too, standing near the edge of the dock, phone in hand, but not using it. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just watched me approach, her expression measured, calculated in a way it had not been before. We stopped a few feet apart, the sound of water moving gently against the dock filling the space. Between us, everything is functioning, she said finally, her voice even, controlled. I said once. As designed, I replied. No tension, no raised voices, just acknowledgement. She held my gaze for a second longer, then gave a small nod of her own. No agreement. Not approved. Just understanding. That was enough. I turned and walked back toward my truck, the sound of my steps steady against the wood. Behind me, the system continues to operate without interruption. Gates opening. Locks releasing. Access granted. The way it was always meant to be. But now, there was something else layered into it. Something invisible, permanent goal. A line that had been crossed and reset. Because they had learned what most people only realize when it is too late. Access is not something you own. It is something someone else allows. And once you understand that, you do not forget it.